Welcome to episode 3 of the Wabash and Erie Canal through Gibson County. In this video, we will start just west of the town of Dongola and finish just north of the town of Francisco, essentially covering the entire canal path through northern Gibson County. Looking north from County Road 50 North in northern Gibson County, you can see the rooftops of a farm in the distance. This represents the location of where the town of Dongola from episode 2 is located. If you recall, the canal exited the town going due west as it crosses what would become Interstate 69 before turning back to the southwest in the field west of the interstate. Here the canal would enter this tree line. This is the location of Box Culvert 200, Hurricane Creek. Before we go very much further, let's talk about culverts. What is a canal culvert? Well, just like a modern culvert under a roadway, canals cross small streams, and in many cases, they were way too small for an aqueduct. Remember, aqueducts are expensive structures to construct, and a lot of maintenance was required to keep them operational. The engineers had to construct culverts to pass under the entire prism, as well as any man-made earthworks of the canal, as is the case in many areas in northern Gibson County. The culverts were generally made of wood or stone at the time of the Wabash and Erie Canal. Later canals would utilize steel pipes to accomplish this task, as is the case with aqueducts in the Southern District or any point south of Terre Haute. Most culverts were made of wood. We will discuss how they worked and how they were preserved from wood rot in a few minutes. But first, let's get back to the northern Gibson County Canal Path Tour.
Looking downstream towards Hurricane Creek Culvert in the prism of the canal. The towpath is on the right-hand side of the screen, and that is the berm. The middle is the bed. You can tell water has carved this out as it heads down towards Hurricane Creek. The canal would have been flat-bottomed, not V-shaped like this. You know this is water done. Let's go up onto the towpath. We're on the towpath, walking downstream. There's the berm. Here's the towpath. And in order to drain this area, they put a cut on the berm side. Bottom land, this is all man-made earthworks through here to raise the canal above Hurricane Creek and the Patoka River floodplain. This is better. This is more like it. Look how deep that got. I got probably 15, 20 feet deep, where compared to this, which is much more overgrown, is only 5, 6 foot deep. And here is the upstream side of Hurricane Creek. We are on the west side, or downstream side, of Hurricane Creek. This is where Box Culvert 200 was located. There's nothing left of it, and you can't even really make out the canal on the far side for all the undergrowth. And as I spin around, you're going to get an idea as to the undergrowth that I had to get through to get to this point. This is very, very thick. We are standing in the bed of the canal. We are now looking downstream. That is the berm here on the left side, and the towpath in that little clearing right there. And we are looking, as I said, downstream of the canal. So we are moving downstream with the audit. We'll go over here to the towpath. This undergrowth is ferocious. Looking in the floodplain. Because of the small undergrowth vegetation, the actual prism is really difficult to see. But as I pan to the right, you should be able to see the towpath. And as I continue panning, you will definitely see the berm. Again, continuing downstream on the canal towards Evansville. Just on the downstream side of Hurricane Creek culvert location. As I said, there's nothing left of the culvert. They dug that out years ago, probably before I was even born.
After the canal passed over Hurricane Creek, it continued through the tree line going due west until this clump of trees. This marks the location of Box Culvert 201. It is at this point the canal again turns southwest, going through the tree line behind the house as it approaches modern County Road 50 North.
I am in an area of the Wabash and Erie Canal. I am standing on the towpath. I am approximately 700 feet north of County Road 50 North in Gibson County. And as I pan around, you can definitely see the far side of the canal was carved into the hillside. To the south, I am standing on the towpath of the Wabash and Erie Canal. We're going to walk this. Now, everything to the right side is floodplain of the Patoka River. And to the left side of the screen, you can tell that the canal was actually dug out of the hillside. It was dug out, and that excess dirt was put here to create the towpath. This towpath and the canal in this area, you got to remember, was dug by hand, and it was done mostly by the Irishmen in the 1830s, late 1840s, and early 1850s. The first full passage of the canal occurred in 1853. Now, as we continue southbound, we're walking closer to County Road 50 North. I want to kind of discuss the culvert locations through here. There are no culverts in this immediate area. The next closest one is to the south of my location. And what they ended up doing when the hill begins to disappear, as you can see in the distance, it's starting its downslope. As it becomes plain or level with the ground around it, they would have built that up, which they did, man-made earthworks, and channeled all that water on what is now the east side of the canal towards the south to flow through that one culvert. Any points north of this ridge would have been flowed to the upstream culvert. That way they could limit how many culverts would have been placed underneath the canal. So as a means to drain the canal, they actually cut the towpath here to drain the canal from both directions into the floodplain. On the other side of this small clearing or cut is the towpath continuing and the bed of the canal. We'll look at that here in a moment. I'm making my way through this clearing back over to the south side of this cut in the towpath. And here is the towpath as it rises on the other side of this cut. Now it's very overgrown over on this side. We are probably 250 feet north of County Road 50 North. And even though the berm is not completely visible, you can definitely tell that there is upland on that side. Again, we are in the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge, so this here is public property. To the north, where this video clip started, is the northern end of the refuge property, and thus private property begins from there. I am almost back to County Road 50 North.
We are now at a location where the Wabash Erie Canal crosses County Road 50 North. You can obviously see a distinct canal prism on the south side of this county road. The canal actually follows the contour of the hill through here and makes yet another turn to the west. Why is the canal so curvy in this area of Gibson County? Wouldn't it be easier to make straight lines? To understand the answer to this question, we have to consider a couple of factors. First, this is not a roadway, it is a waterway. It cannot easily go up and over a hill, nor is it easy to go through a hill because of the work entailed to accomplish these tasks. Secondly, water doesn't flow uphill without the assistance of mechanical means. To go over any and all hills require a water supply at the top of the hill to support the water demands of the canal in both directions of the hill. And the engineers would have to build locks to lift and lower the canal up and over the hill. Understand that canals do go over hills, as is the case in Clay County, Indiana. And that is an episode all on its own for another time. And sometimes a canal had to be dug through a hill, sometimes even via a tunnel. There were no tunnels on the Wabash and Erie Canal. In all cases, it was easier and cheapest to utilize the topography of the land in order to maintain a relatively flat path for the canal to follow. It was so flat that the canal on average would drop 1 inch per mile. In this area, the canal crosses Box Culvert 202. This culvert was located on the western edge of this tree line. Take note of this stream. This stream used to pass through Culvert 202. Unfortunately, the culvert is no longer there, but the cut in the earthworks show where it was located. Now, as we cross into this fielded area, there is a low ridge that marks the towpath of the canal prism, and it follows the contour of the hill in this area, so they didn't have to use as much labor to build the earthworks. This still shot looking into the prism of the canal, can you see it? On the left side is the towpath. On the right side is the berm, and in the middle there is a low gap that marks the location of the bed. This photo was taken on County Road 1050 East, facing east. From this same point, looking northwest across this field, you can see the low gap. That represents where the canal bed was as it made its way back to County Road 50 North. In this area, the Wabash and Erie Canal and County Road 50 North come back together and become one. For the most part in this area, the canal was partially filled in and the road sits atop part of the bed and the entirety of the towpath. As we drive west along County Road 50 North, the canal is going to be on the left side of the road. We're going to follow this to the Buck Creek Culvert, Culvert 203.
Welcome to Box Culvert 203, Buck Creek, still in use. To our knowledge, this is the only fully intact wooden box culvert left along the entire route of the Wabash and Erie Canal. There is another one in Pike County, partially been torn apart. This one is completely intact.
We already discussed what a culvert was, why they were constructed, and of what types of materials. But now I want to discuss how this type of culvert works and how it has not suffered wood rot. The Buck Creek Culvert was made of wood, as I've already said, which we all know wood will rot over time. But that's not always the case, as is this instance here. You see, water by itself does not cause wood to rot. Rather, it is the combination of water and air. If wood is rarely to never exposed to air, it will not rot. So by building pools of water on the upstream and the downstream side of this culvert, it keeps all wooden components free of air exposure, thus protecting the wood from rotting and causing a failure of the canal earthworks.
These pools would have been lined in the bottom, a lot of times with timbers themselves.
So how is this culvert constructed? In the pools of Culvert 203, there is a timber lining along the bottom and the walls of the pools. This helps prevent collapse from the sides of the pools and acts as a foundation for a dam to be constructed at the ends. Where the culvert begins to pass under the canal earthworks, here a conduit of wood is created to act as a pipe to allow the water to pass under the canal, as illustrated in this drawing. So how does the water move? Water enters the upstream pool. As it does, the pool fills and the more weight is being compiled on the water that is already in the upper pool. This added weight pushes down on the water already in the pool, forcing the water at the bottom of this pool through the culvert under the canal and into the downstream or lower pool. As the water enters the lower pool from the bottom, it is raising the level of water in this pool, which will cause the water to exceed the height of the dam at the far end of the pool. Once the water exceeds this dam height, it spills over the top of said obstruction and the flows downstream. As we tour this site, understand you will not be able to see much because, as I have said, it is completely submerged. You will see a modern culvert. This pipe sits approximately 3 foot above the wooden culvert and acts as an emergency spillway during heavy rain and flood events. This new culvert was installed to save the Buck Creek Culvert from removal. It was a concerted effort between the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge, Indiana Department of Natural Resources, Gibson County, and the Canal Society of Indiana to protect this endangered piece of history. Because of this effort, the state of Indiana has made note of this location and the historical significance it holds. Additionally, they have listed it as a protected historical structure. Culvert 203 sits 23 feet below the bottom of the canal. Here, the bed of the canal was partially filled in for the roadway, and the remainder of the road sits atop of the towpath. The Buck Creek Culvert is 153 feet long. Each space, and there's 2 spaces to it, are 2 feet tall by 8 feet wide. Water enters the pool on the south side of the prism as the stream flows from the south to the north in this area, and it is lined with timbers, as I've already said. We discovered these timbers when they installed the modern culvert. The water enters the culvert in the manner already described and exits on the north side of the prism, entering into the downstream pool. The markers in the water identify the edges of the culvert. From the top of those poles, it is 6 feet down in the water until you reach the top of the culvert. The pool has a dam running across it downstream. Now, we don't know the exact location of the dam, but it keeps this pool flooded all year long. Once the water level exceeds the height of the dam, said water flows over it and it continues north to the Patoka River.
So how old is this box culvert? We know from the 1849 engineer's report that this culvert would have been installed somewhere around 1836 to 1839. Because it says in the 1849 on it that they're going to build the canal on the abandoned works of 1838 and 1839. So the way this would have been built is you would have had this all laid out. They would have put the culverts in, put the earth in on top of it, and started building the earthworks on top of that culvert. Knowing that, and knowing that in 1849 they talked about completing the canal atop of the abandoned works of 1838, 1839, that means this is at least 1839. A minimum of 181 years this culvert has ran and done its job, and is still doing it today. Which means that it is 19 years away, 19 years from being 200 years old.
We are once again traveling west on County Road 50 North, and again the canal path has been built up on these man-made earthworks. The canal prism is easy to identify off to the left-hand side of the screen. This roadway stays adjacent to the canal bed for about 3/4 of a mile before the Wabash and Erie Canal veers off and goes north into a field. We're going to stay on this road until that point. We are at the west end of the canal prism along County Road 50 North. It is at this point the canal turns north-northwest following the hillside here to maintain its level state. With this map of the topography of the area, you can see in 1961, which is the year of this map, that the canal was very plainly marked, and some areas were still watered, but those locations are long gone because of coal mining operations in the area. In the top right-hand corner, you will notice that the canal turns off of County Road 50 North and follows the topography of the hillside, as I said. It will continue to follow this path going around this ridge, then turning back to the south on the west side of the hill as it approaches the Cade Creek area. There is very little evidence today of the canal in this area. The prism has been pretty much removed from the naked eye, except for a slight indentation in the fields that is only visible when the crops are down. However, it is very visible from aerial photographs. Looking at the earthworks across modern Cade Creek, which is actually a dredge that was performed in the 1920s as a means to straighten the creek to make it drain faster, it was crossed by Culvert 204, and it was a rather large culvert. The Cade Creek culvert sat approximately 200 to 300 foot on the other side of this dredge. The earthworks here were very extensive, and they go on for almost 3/4 of a mile. Although they don't seem as high as the works back at the Patoka River Aqueduct, they are as equally impressive. Reagan's works were northwest of Oakland City about 3 miles and included the section which crossed Cade Creek and its bottoms. This was one of the heaviest works on the line. The fill across the bottoms was 100 feet wide and was from 15 to 18 feet to the bottom of the canal. 10 on one side the berm bank, and on the other the towpath were made. These banks were 6 feet higher than the bottom of the canal. On these heavy works there was a large number of men, carts, and teams that worked for nearly 3 years. At that time there were many ox teams used. They had a very large plow on these works, which the writer has seen drawn by 8 yoke of heavy oxen. Now we are at the western end of the Cade Creek section. The tree line in the distance is the actual path of the canal. Just shortly after this, the actual path, nay, the canal prism, disappears once again because of the mining operations in the area. But as you will be able to see with this map, that the canal once again went around another hill just like it did between Buck and Cade Creeks. As this section made its way south along the western side of this hill, the Wabash and Erie Canal crossed 2 more culverts, an unnamed stream and the East Fork of Lost Creek. It is here that the canal begins its northern approach into the town of Francisco.